Thundergrunts.
Welcome to Writers Blockbusters, the show where we treat the final edit of a movie like the script. I'm one of your hosts, Bob Rose, at Thundergrunt Bob on Twitter, and the other guys are going to introduce themselves right now, starting with Jamie.
I am Jamie Nash. I am at Jamie_Nash, and I usually save this for the end, but since it's coming up, I'll be at the Austin Film Festival at the end of October. So for the two people that intersect this podcast and the Austin, probably one person. I probably know who they are. I could just email myself, but I'll be there at the end of the month. So if for some weird reason you're listening to this podcast and you will be at Austin, show up with the special Raiders Blockbusters code word of, I don't know what it is. And you will get a special prize.
So if they walk up to you and say rooting influencer, you have to buy them a drink. No, I'm kidding.
I was thinking of some bingo card related thing to say. Like
it tracks.
It tracks. Say it tracks, and you will receive a special prize. Don't tell anyone. Now I have to come up with a special prize. I'll have it in my pocket the whole time. It'll be like my business card or
just
something.
Give out some hard candy or something.
Yeah, exactly. Something I get on the airplane, or it'll be that
peanuts.
It'll be that card, that says how to put your life preserver on.
A true fan though will be like, "Oh my god, I got Jamie Nash's airplane card."
Yeah, exactly. Signed by me. I'll sign it. I'll sign the airplane card. I'll smuggle it down of the airplane.
This guy wrote a Save the Cat book, man.
That's right. Exactly, and that might inspire your next screenplay.
Right.
All right. Well, I am Jimmy George. Yeah. I am Jimmy George. I am a screenwriter and script consultant, and my Twitter handle is at Jimmy R. George.
And you're not giving out any prizes, huh? Okay.
No prizes.
Well, disappointing everybody. Come on, man. I'm kidding.
What kind of podcast is this? No prizes.
No prizes.
Why
even do it?
We need to give away like concert tickets and stuff like that for the next three callers. Wait a minute,
Robert McKee tickets.
right.
By the way,
fucking expensive.
Did you see Robert McKee's last seminar? This is his last one. This is your last. This isn't an ad, by the way, for Robert McKee.
If the whole show has been an ad for Robert.
if you've always wanted to go to Robert McKee's seminar and see it live, you can always see it taped because he did tape it during COVID. And I'm sure that's part of the calculus here. But he's doing his last live ones this year. That's what I saw I got an email or something that said that.
People that listen to our show would be interested to know that. So
he's finally retiring at the end of this year. So this is your last chance. Go to New York, LA, or London to see him.
Wow.
Retiring like the king he is. Anyway, today we are going to talk about a movie that is currently being rebooted, remade, rehashed. I don't know what the term is for how the continuity works, but we're talking about the original Hellraiser from 1987, the Clive Barker written and directed original.
OG.
The OG, the first one. And
it's being re-raised. That's what we should say.
Re-raised. Yes, re-raised. That's pretty good, Jamie.
That's why Jamie gets the big bucks.
That's right. The re-raisement or something.
And just to be clear with everyone, I feel like I say this for some franchise movies, we're only talking about the first movie. We're not, we're talking about the writing of the first movie as if we had only seen the first movie.
Does the new one have a subtitle? Is it like
no?
It's just, it does the Halloween
just like
2018.
Candyman, Scream, Halloween, now Hellraiser.
I was going to go with Hellraiser.
Wrong turn.
Rises.
It's just
another Rises.
You know what? They've beat me into submission so much that I don't even complain about the title thing anymore.
Nah.
It used to enrage me. I hate the fact that there is movies with the same title.
Old man yells at cloud.
There just shouldn't be movies with the same title, but whatever. It doesn't matter.
I just always like mentally substitute part 2 on the end.
I don't understand why they can't just call stuff like Hellraiser 2022.
Yeah.
Right? Like, just call it that. That should be the official title. Whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, they only did that in 2000. It was Dracula 2000.
I know. Let's bring it back, man.
Yeah.
Just put fucking years after shit now.
Who cares?
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
This is sort of off topic, or it's on topic, but off topic.
Like the rest of this podcast so far.
So,
it's fine. Jamie doesn't have a heart out. We can just.
That's right.
Yeah.
So this is funny, and
buckle up.
We'll talk about our relationship to Hellraiser. I guess
that's what I was trying to get to.
Okay, but for the first time ever, I started to debate: is the Hellraiser, is it Pinhead, or is it the guy who uses the box? Is he the Hellraiser?
I think it's a double meaning, right?
All of them.
But I don't know, because then it goes into sequels, and it's like Hellraiser 2.
Well,
and are those people raising hell, or
as we discussed, like the sequels kind of clung to Pinhead, right? Like that's the point. He became the icon, so that yes, in the sequels, I would say that Pinhead is in fact the Hellraiser. In this movie, it is debatable.
Okay, does that make sense?
So yeah, and it is worth noting and irrelevant that the original plan was for Julia to be the villain of the series. Like, not just for this one, not just for the second one, but if they were going to continue with the franchise, Julia was going to be the supernatural entity villain of the series, not like a Cenobite. And the actress didn't want to do it. So
she hates horror movies.
Did she? That make okay.
She doesn't hate the movie. She's just like she can't handle
that doing that. I
which is totally valid.
Totally valid. And especially for these performers with this type of material, they're having to go to a really dark place.
Oh, you guys are wrong. She's letting us down. She let us down. Don't let her.
No, but
Jamie's hot take from like an angry YouTube channel.
Pun intended. It's gonna bleed into a lot of the topics that we talk about, but like I was really struck by when we go to deconstruct the movie by like Pinhead's not really that important to this movie.
No.
And it was very much like the first Friday the 13th, where it's like Jason isn't the killer, his mom is. He's some on the side. So that
even just thematically, like the story isn't about Pinhead or
right. No, not at all.
But okay, before we get there, let's just go around and say our relationship to this movie like we do with the classic episodes, okay? Because this is a true horror classic. It's an 80s horror movie.
Jamie, why don't you go?
It's a prime movie to talk about this.
Woo.
Yeah. So what year did this come out? 87, right?
87.
Yeah, so it would put me at, I'm trying to figure out how old I was.
I was 5. So,
I was 7.
Yeah.
I was 15. So this movie, Clive Barker in general, when I was that age, he became really huge in my life. Like he was a big influence, more so for his books in some ways. Like after Hellraiser and Hellraiser 2, I'm not even sure if I saw Hellraiser 3. I probably did, but I vaguely remember. I was huge. Like I was first in line for Nightbreed when that showed up in the theater. But the Books of Blood were huge for me. I remember I got them for Christmas. My birthday is actually
that's hysterical.
Right, yeah, it's right around my birthday is December 20th, right? So send me cards on December 20th.
Man, you're a Christmas baby. Okay.
Yeah, so I used to always get presents that I'd be like, well, I'll be off for the next month. And I was a book kid, so get me books. So the Hellraiser, the Books of Blood, I remember I got somewhere around this time, and I devoured them, and they were like my favorite. And part of it was, if you asked me like 4 or 5 years before that, or 2 years even, or maybe even then, and you asked me, I would have said I was a sci-fi and fantasy person. But I also read all the Stephen King and Dean R. Koontz books. So it was this weird mix. And I think Clive Barker was the bridge that showed me they could all be kind of related in some ways. It was kind of like Dungeons and Dragons, but also Freddy Krueger in some weird way. And so they were very influential for me, especially the Books of Blood, which get really weird and funky, in their own way. Damnation Game, all those books. So I became a big Clive Barker fan, but in some ways, Clive didn't produce material fast enough for me or something. Like he didn't come out with a new movie every few years. He came out with a Hellraiser. He did Nightbreed. Lords of Illusion, I think, came kind of further along. And I think
mid-90s, I think.
Yeah, I think I just fell out of love with it. Like he was my guy for a few years. And then because he wasn't churning one thing out a year, that I was reading his books and stuff. But it wasn't as I kind of wasn't, I didn't track with him as much just because he didn't have the material that I wanted, like the movies and the books. But at this time, Hellraiser was a big movie. It only made 14.6 million, which is a lot of money that I have on the box office. I guess
the budget was 900,000 though, right?
Absolutely. So it's a huge hit. But my point being, I don't think everybody saw this movie. It wasn't like the Jason movies or the Friday the 13th movies. It's not a party movie. It still felt like I was
No.
It kind of, it fed that like high school thing of like, oh, I watched the cooler bands and you watched the popular bands a little bit. Like me liking Clive Barker was a little bit different than everybody else seeing Freddy Krueger or something like that, even though I saw that too. But Hellraiser felt, while it was popular, it wasn't like the mass popularity that these other things had. At least that was my take on it when I was 15 years old.
It's the punk horror movie.
a little bit.
Yeah.
Like I felt kind of cool to be like, oh, my favorite's Hellraiser. I think it was that Reanimator were the two I'd throw out.
Right.
Like I'd always be like, Reanimator is my favorite, dude. And Hellraiser.
We got to do Reanimator at some point too.
Oh my God, yes, please.
Anyway, that's my story with Clive.
Jimmy.
So 1987 is I think it's my favorite year for movies. There's so many classic ones, and this one ranks high for me. I think this is maybe a lot of people are unfamiliar with the movie Pig. We talked about Pig. We did an episode about Pig and how Pig is the anti John Wick. Like I think this is the Pig of horror movies. It's like going the other direction in a beautiful, like memorable, like resonant ways at every step of the process, with the character work, with the horror, with the structure, with everything. It subverts it all in a way that at a time where like everything was like pretty cookie cutter, right? It was sort of like the heyday of the slasher movie, the 80s slasher movie, where everyone was getting chased down by a masked maniac or an unmasked maniac, women, like teenage women getting killed by a masked killer or a man without a mask. And here we have a woman who's like in her 30s hunting down men for her like sexual fulfillment, essentially to gain sexual fulfillment. So it's like really weird. And I'm sure that, we're three old white dudes, and I'm sure that women would have some insight into this story that we couldn't give. But I love this movie, and I'll give my one little Hellraiser anecdote. I used to have a DVD player that was like I bought for like $20, a no-name DVD player for like $20 that would allow me to play movies at double speed with the volume on. So like if you try to do that now, it doesn't work. They're silent, but everything sounded like Micro Machines. So when I was studying movies, I was able to absorb them very quickly. And I used to watch movies for study like we do for this show at 2 speed. And there was a situation where I was hired to do a paid rewrite for a movie with a Hellraiser inspired, like I didn't come up with the killer. The people who were hiring me did, like the producers. And so I was hired to do like a rewrite on this. And And I was like, okay, well, I have very little knowledge of the sequels. So I basically watched, at the time there were only 7. This was like many years ago, over a decade ago. I watched all 7 Hellraisers on fast forward in one sitting so I could make sure that I wasn't, so that I make sure I had an encyclopedic knowledge of the franchise, and so that I could make sure I wasn't unintentionally being derivative of the character because I had never seen 5 and 6 and 7. So yeah, one day I sat down and from morning to night I watched all 7 Hellraisers back to back, and it was the worst day of my life, definitely.
I once did that with a group of people for a podcast. Like starting at like 5 a.m.
Oh my gosh.
It was brutal. Not necessarily because of the movies. It was just brutal of an exercise to do.
It's brutal.
It's brutal.
I did the same thing for Saws. For the Saws.
Same. I did that for the same other podcast.
Oh,
What
a soul killer.
Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
I was gonna say to respond, Jimmy, to your thing about how us being 3 old white dudes, we might not understand, the sexual tension of this movie. Last night, I am not kidding, organically on my Twitter feed, someone just had a picture of the main character of this movie just smoking the cigarette. Remember the scene where she's just smoking the cigarette?
Mm-hmm.
And like the tweet was just, when the D is just that good. And it was a woman tweeting it, and it had like 15,000 likes.
Wow.
And that,
well, yeah,
that's, I mean, I saw it last night organically, not because I was looking it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just saying, that's sort of the vibe that Hellraiser
That's
left
the
on
vibe.
culture.
That's the anti-heroin
is just that good
journey, right?
Yeah, right.
So yeah.
For me, I'm the youngest of the 3 of us. I'm going to be honest here. I came to Hellraiser after I knew about Pinhead's iconic stature. Probably somewhere in the mid to late 90s is when I first watched Hellraiser. I didn't have the relationship that Jamie had with the books or anything like that. I just knew about Pinhead because he was talked about often, and because of Jason, because I had looked him up because of Jason Goes to Hell, and because he was constantly one of the figures in Mad Magazine that was always like, when they did their horror issues, they always had like, the icons doing funny stuff. I was like, okay, there's Pinhead. That's that guy. Okay, I get it. So I came to this with that perspective. And then when I watched the movie, I absolutely loved it. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, and it was nothing I ever expected. Like, I fell in love with it instantly, and I was like, oh, because in my mind, to what Jamie was saying, I was just expecting Freddy Krueger. I was expecting Hellraiser to be some kind of just demon that shows up and kills kids or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I remember watching this, and in the 90s, I was still I'm young. And I was just like, this is like nothing I'd ever seen before. So I felt like, it did feel, even in my little world of watching it on VHS, it felt like it opened up a whole new realm of what horror could be for me. So it's not nearly as cool or impressive as you guys, but because I just watched it like on VHS by myself, but
it's still cool, Bob.
Right, but Pinhead was already Pinhead, and I was coming into it like that, and I was like, oh wait, Pinhead's like barely in this fucking movie. I was like, okay, I didn't know what to expect. So yeah, but I absolutely have been in love with this series ever since. Even the bad one, there's a lot of bad, but I still 1 and 2, 3.
Yeah, I like 3.
Yeah, I like 3. 3's the goofy one. Absolutely one of the best ever. One of my favorite horror movies ever. So
just because one of my favorite things to do, and Jimmy mentioned it, I did look at domestic box office for 87. I just had to go back.
Go do it.
I love doing this. So it's interesting because 87 was kind of a year when I think Hollywood really figured out the machine. You know what I mean? They were cranking on all cylinders, but
the Reagan era really started clicking.
But it doesn't have like the one definitive like Empire Strikes Back, or you know what I mean, or whatever huge movie, Beverly Hills Cop or
was
something.
Predator
like
87?
Predator was 87. It came in
Lost
10th.
Boys.
Yeah,
it came in 10th. The number 1 movie was Beverly Hills Cop 2. So Beverly Hills Cop was still around.
One of my favorite movies of all time, sir.
RoboCop, right? It's got to be in there.
RoboCop RoboCop as well. I was surprised.
Dirty Dancing is in there.
Dirty Dancing.
What a year! What a year!
Platoon, which was huge for me. That was another big movie.
Oh yeah,
for me.
Platoon.
I
mean, I don't love Platoon. I mean, yeah, you know what I mean.
Fatal Attraction, The Untouchables, Three Men and a Baby, and then here's the one that always stands out to me because nobody ever talks about this movie. I mean, we all know it, and everybody that listens probably knows it. But The Secret of My Success, like people kind of snooze on how big that movie was, back.
I've always said that's the perfect double feature with American Psycho. Because American Psycho is the horror version of that movie. It's the same themes and the characters have the same desires, but it's like the total opposite genre and it's treated differently. I love that movie though. I've seen it so many times. That's also where the Ferris Bueller song is for me. The Ferris Bueller song comes from that movie because I saw that first.
Me too. Yeah. I always remember it from that movie more than Ferris Bueller because Ferris Bueller has so much other stuff going on. But
right.
That's what I remember about that movie is like him sneaking around in the bushes or something, and they're playing that music. Anyway,
it's at night when they're all very relevant to Hellraiser at night.
Yeah,
when everybody in the house is trying to have sex with everybody else, and they're playing the Ferris Bueller song.
Right.
By Mellow. Whatever it is.
It's funny when I look at this list, I think I saw all of the top 20 in the theater of this because I'm looking at outrageous portion.
Years, man.
Absolutely. La Bamba. I didn't see Dirty Dancing in the theater, so that would be the one I didn't see in the top 20. Oh, and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs re-release. I didn't see that movie.
Okay.
Full Metal Jacket. I saw the
Full Metal Jacket. I mean, what a year.
A Nightmare on Elm Street 3.
3. Yes.
God.
Mannequin. Roxanne. Blind Date. Spaceballs. Star Trek 4: The Voyage Home comes in at 25th because it was released November 26th, probably.
Gotcha.
So they kind of penalize it. The Golden Child, which was a big movie for me.
Love The Golden Child.
I saw all of these how many times did I go to the movie theater when I was a kid? Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, The Running Man. I mean, I must have seen 60 movies in the theater that year. I'm just amazed.
So
The Lost Boys.
To me, I got to say the best 2 years of the 80s for releases was 82 and 87.
Yeah, 87.
If you look at 82, it's nuts. It's like everything we love 82, but 87 is pretty great too. So
yeah.
It's two amazing movies.
Even like the lesser movies on here, like Police Academy 4. I saw that in the theater.
Still one of the best police academies.
Eddie Murphy Raw. I saw that in the theater.
That's huge.
Gosh, 3 Eddie Murphy titles in that list.
Well, 87 would be Eddie Murphy was literally the king of Earth at that point.
Yeah.
Hoosiers is on this list.
Man.
Raising Arizona is on.
Man.
I saw all of these movies. I must have been in the movie theater like my entire life in 1987.
We're just going to sit here and Jamie's just going to read off titles.
And we're going to go, yes.
Oh, yeah, say it.
It's
preach.
Say it, Jamie, say it.
Preach.
Harder, Jamie.
Cinema.
Harder.
This is blowing me away how many there were. I mean, I'm kind of amazed because I know I saw them all.
If you read this list to a kid right now, they'd be like sounds like
I'll watch the YouTube review of it.
I'm just thinking back. Honestly, I saw every one of these, and even going down the list to 100, it's like Masters of the Universe is on there.
Love it.
All these Superman.
I'm saying, man, 87.
I saw Batteries Not Included. Hellraiser.
Yes.
I mean,
that's Bob. It's happening. We're just doing exactly what you just said.
Creepshow 2, American Tail, Prince of Darkness, Hamburger Hill. I saw all of these in the theater. Everyone.
Man.
That's crazy.
Just fucking bangers after bangers.
No, this is the most eye-opening thing because I might have seen 100 movies in the movie theater in 1987. Where did I get the money?
So the point is, Hellraiser didn't come out when like nothing else was happening.
No,
it came out in the thick of shit, and it still stood out. That's what we can take away from it.
Yep.
Yeah, it came. It's Clive Barker though. I mean.
Yeah. Speaking of that.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Speaking of the man.
Wait, Angel Heart, Three Amigos, and the Mist. Radio Days.
Wait, are those all actually titles from?
Yes,
87?
Ishtar.
God, man, really?
Yes. I'm blown away by this list.
I told you.
I'm blown away by this list.
That's the best year.
Yeah, man.
Crazy.
Jeez. Jeez Louise. All right.
Okay, sorry. I have to go away from, because probably in the next 100 to 200, there's probably more.
I could just spend a whole year watching movies from 1987, probably.
Yeah.
Anyway, Clive Barker, speaking of the writer, the author, Clive Barker, who wrote this shit. I'm just answering that question, Jamie.
Clive Barker
wrote
Bob's subverting expectations.
I'm subverting,
answering it himself.
Yes, this is the Clive Barker of Writers Blockbusters. Bob is the killer, not Jamie.
And by the way, I have the book versus movie thing, and we can talk about that super quick because there's not a ton.
Yeah,
we might as well talk about it.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah,
so it started out as a book. I reread the book this year for some reason. I can't remember why exactly, but or last year. Maybe it was 2020. I don't know, because everything blends together now. But the book is really short. It's like a novella. It's about 160 pages long. And it's not that different than the movie. It never names like Pinhead, obviously. That's something that
wasn't
just
he
came.
The priest or something like that?
Yeah. It's something like that. The daughter isn't a daughter. She's like a family friend. So that part's a little mixed up. And then in the beginning, it loads you up with kind of exposition. Like it takes you into Frank's mind in the beginning, like buying the puzzle box. And so it turns out it makes a meal out of that. Like that's so
and
the movie kind of lets you figure it out as it goes, but it lays out the Cenobites and the warnings and all that stuff way up front in the story.
The book called the cube the lament configuration?
It does. It mentions the lament configuration, which comes into play in the later movies.
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
as far as a word, it doesn't have like that bat creature and stuff at the end. In fact, in preparation for this, I looked at like some of the bullet points because I was like, maybe I'm missing some things that were changed, but really I wasn't. There wasn't. It's very similar in some ways to the book. I think you'll get a similar experience from both. I don't remember the end. And honestly, the end of this movie, which we don't really talk about here, goes off the rails a little bit. It kind of, they come up with those cheesy special effects, like the visual effects, like with the laser beam things and stuff like that, coming out of the box.
On the IMDb trivia, they say Clive Barker said that he and a Greek guy, quote unquote, did that in one weekend.
Yeah, it looked like they drew on the actual film. That's what it looked like to me.
He had some quote about it, and he was like, they were both extremely drunk.
Yeah, it didn't look like an optical printer.
Honestly, the thing that sucks about, and this is not screenwriting, but whatever.
No,
these visual effects were made for standard definition viewing. Like,
yeah.
We weren't. When I first saw this, I remember the first time I got the DVD and I watched it. The VHS, I never saw the seams. The effects were so good. And it's one of those things where I feel like, the HD and then the 4K I think these old horror movies and the effects, cleaning it up often does a disservice to the experience because the people who were doing those types of work, they were doing it mainly for people who were going to see it ultimately on like a 13-inch television.
I don't know if I don't agree with that, but
they're going to see it on the big screen for like 3 months and then never again,
right?
On a clean,
They knew that it was going to be on film though and projected, large.
But I always feel like these movies get the 4K cleanup does a disservice to these movies and makes the effects look worse than they did when they first came out.
To me, that doesn't make sense, but I've always been like the effects don't matter to me. So, you know what I mean?
I'm passionate about this, obviously.
I love
my movies.
I think George Lucas needed to come in and throw a bantha in there or something, just to mix it up.
I don't mind seeing old movies in their full res and seeing seams. I never have. But,
My thing with the end, and this really isn't a topic, but it felt a little bit like, we have to be one of those Hollywood horror movies now. So the girl needs to run away from the monsters for a while and have the box. And we're bringing in some boy who's barely in the movie. And he's going to be in there
So it
too.
felt like a studio decision. You're saying
It felt like, and I don't think it was a studio decision, but it felt like a little bit of, this is what the people want, the kids want, so we got to really amp this up. So they extended it a little bit. They made it like she's zapping people with the box almost when she presses the buttons and stuff. Anyway, it's just one of those things. All the movies did that. I remember when I was back in the 80s, when I saw in the 87, when I saw 300 movies in the theater. I think every horror movie ended with a knife chase with a girl running around the building or a monster. And it kind of got a little bit running around a house. You know what I mean? Like it's a foot chase battle sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
It was just kind of a thing that they did. It was like, oh, we need to put this in. We could do anything else in the beginning, but this has to be there in the end.
I don't think this is one of the topics, but it does sort of pivot to a fresh final girl midway. Even
it does.
You know what I mean? Like it turns her into.
No, I think this is the very first topic. Let's just go into it.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah. Right.
This is good timing to talk about this.
I didn't plan that, so that's how good I am today.
Subversion.
No one. Yeah. That wasn't even a transition. That was just me talking.
And I think it actually rolls right into the log line as well.
That's why I put it up front. Yeah.
I think one of the reasons the movie does feel so unique is that there is no protagonist, but it never feels lost to me. You know, there is a protagonist, but you know what I mean? Like I'm not sure of it and it doesn't feel lost.
Yeah. It's this really unconventional approach. So we're all in agreement that the movie swaps protagonists intentionally.
Totally.
Yeah. Which is really fucking weird.
And most movies
it's totally different from the Psycho approach where you have a false protagonist for the first act and then we have the actual protagonist. We have a clear protagonist for the first two acts, and then the third act is a new protagonist.
Yeah.
So it's really weird.
It's almost closer to The Shining, or something like that. Maybe closer to Alien in some ways when we saw that. Though the difference is the girl in this is almost an afterthought. She doesn't live there. She barely shows up. She's not involved in the setup.
We don't know much about her.
Yeah.
She doesn't.
She's like the half man for Julia, as in like she's warning the audience about Julia before we ever really know. You know what I mean?
They don't set her up to get a character arc or anything.
Yeah,
like
they don't.
That,
really.
Right, but it works.
She's just a girl that we need, and somehow all these characters I like, even though none of them are likable and have your typical rooting resume, that we kind of.
Do you want to swap? You want to scoot down there and then go back to the log line? Because
we could kind of jump around.
We're gonna just be clear. I feel like we didn't really give an answer. We all feel like there is no actual like protagonist with a question with like a star next to their name.
I do think the woman.
I think Julia is the protagonist.
I was going to say, yes. That's what I wanted.
Yes. What I'm trying to say is,
I would argue Julia is too.
I think it's very unconventional that she, like, Kirsty. So I think where it changes is at 55 minutes, Larry tells Kirsty he suspects something is, like, deeply wrong with Julia.
Right.
And then from then on, Kirsty's perspective. So we're talking, like, 35 minutes. Kirsty's perspective takes center stage, and then 15 minutes later, Julia's dead. And then the last 15 minutes, our protagonist has been dead for 15 minutes, and it's just Kirsty, and her survival takes our rooting interest, right?
Yep.
So it's really fucking weird, and it works, and I think that's instructive. I
also feel like Julia's death has always, to me, said so much about Frank's intentions.
Yeah, dude.
Because it's almost unclimactic. It's so like, hey, by the way, you didn't mean shit to me.
Yeah, dude.
It says so much about Frank. You know what I mean? And it's unsure of how much he cares until that moment. Like, you could almost believe he was just as in love with her.
Yeah.
To some
he
degree.
was using sex as a weapon to get his way. It's the perfect so premise reversal.
It says so much about him.
It's interesting that these kind of protagonist switches, I think you mostly see in horror movies. Like You don't see an action movie where Arnold is in it for 50 minutes and then suddenly somebody else.
Jamie, I can only think of Executive Decision, where Steven Seagal dies in the first 15 minutes. And it becomes a Russell Crowe movie.
And that's kind of a rug pull scenario.
Not Russell Crowe, Kurt Russell. Sorry,
Kurt Russell.
Yeah,
they're trying.
Kurt Russell Crowe.
I just woke up. Sorry.
That's almost like the more psycho version of it, where it's kind of like they trick you. They're like,
that's the false protagonist.
But a lot of you will see this in horror movies from time to time, and while The Shining comes to mind in some ways, because a lot of times it's somebody that has a descent and then they become the villain in the end. And the only difference in The Shining is we get plenty of the person that we're going to switch to is in the movie a lot. Like it's AB. It's not like, this side character then comes in and becomes the protagonist.
It would be like if Jaws killed off Brody and then Hooper was the star for the last 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Jamie, but do you want to circle back? We'll talk about the rooting interest.
Yeah, sure.
And then we can circle back to the log line, because I do think it's all related.
I agree.
It's all sort of like they all work together. So did you want to start this to say where your head was at with asking this question?
I mean, the only thing is I wrote this down as a question. I wrote, are any of these characters likable? Because and usually you have that rooting resume, that thing that checks the boxes of why we're going to root for them. So even if they're bad people, we kind of get that they're underdogs, or they have some relatable thing, or we have a hope for them.
That's why like Seinfeld works, or
there's some potential in there or something that we kind of like them anyway. In this movie, the strangest part about it is I kind of do like them anyway. I think it's great casting and some other things, because Julia is the one that, do we like her? Is there, like, a lot of times what a movie would do like this is they give her good reason to have her longing for Frank, right? You establish all these, like, the world puts her down and her husband's mean to her.
Yeah, Larry's a piece of crap or something.
Larry's a piece of crap. He's not giving her what he wants.
Yeah.
But Larry's this kind of stiff, super normal dude. And it's kind of funny. This movie is almost like, I don't know if it's the Britishness of Clive Barker, but it has this weird vibe, right? Where they're wearing suits when they show up for the first day. They're like always wearing a tie. He's like, time for breakfast, I'll wear my tie. And she's always wearing a dress and has her like earrings on.
They're not slovenly Americans in any typical sense. Yeah.
And I guess that hints at sort of a repression that adds to that sexual tension we'll talk about later on.
Right. And I was going to say, like, to some degree, her pushback on Larry, who's not, I don't hate Larry. I think Larry's a good guy.
He seems fine.
He seems fine, like guy, but he seems completely, like, the whole movie is about how they're demons of experience, giving you the extreme pain and pleasure of of the mind and of reality. And Larry is like the exact opposite,
and I think
in
that's
every way,
the thing.
Right? Yeah, like
that's the problem though for her.
Yeah.
So I didn't do Jamie's rooting resume, but for context to people who are listening who haven't listened to our previous episodes, we talk a lot about how a character doesn't need to be quote unquote likable. They just need to be relatable. And we've given many episodes, like if you go back and listen to the Joker episode, there's something called rooting influencer techniques. And we found that there were 15 rooting influencer techniques for Joker in the first 10 minutes. And they just keep coming and coming and coming. And so I didn't do the rooting influencers, but there's another thing from Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, which is called The Things That Need Fixing. I know you guys know what I'm talking about, but I'm talking to listeners who may not have heard of it before. So one technique that you can do to get the audience to connect with your character, even if they're not quote unquote likable, but we can still find ways to make them emotionally relatable, is to give them what Blake Snyder calls the things that need fixing. And these things come in 5 categories. I'm going to list the 5 categories, and then I'll go and give examples from this movie that I think they track. I think it tracks. Bingo. So these things come in 5 categories. They are changes in attractiveness, false beliefs, or personality, strained personal relationships, not being entrusted with responsibility or not being able to handle responsibility, being invisible to key people or seeking invisibility, and others don't believe in you or you've given up on yourself. So first, I'm just going to go and give, I pulled the description, even though I haven't read Hellbound Heart. I'm going to pull the description of Julia from the novel. He says, Julia's a very complicated character, lost, lonely, pissed off with her husband. She's much more interesting than your average horror movie heroine. It's funny that that's on the page.
Yeah.
So Clive Barker refers to her as an anti-heroine, which we don't talk about that often. We talk about a lot anti-heroes, but we don't say the phrase. I feel like it's an underused phrase, anti-heroine. So, changes in attractiveness, false beliefs, and her personality. I'm saying that the movie, it's very measurable that in the flashbacks with Frank, Julia is softer, her skin looks better, she's brighter, she's healthier looking, she's fucking happy. She is like way more comfortable in her own skin in her flashbacks with Frank. In the present day, she is mean, her skin is pale, she's nauseous all the time, she's sick, and she's vomiting. Like,
she's also seen smoking a lot.
It's very measurable, right? So
she's got anxiety and
yeah. I think you could say that these are things that need fixing right there that we see that clearly makes her relatable. Strained personal relationships. I mean, she has strange personal relationships with Larry and Kirsty. Kirsty literally says she's uptight and frigid. And number 3, not being entrusted with responsibility or not being able to handle responsibility. Larry works all day while Julia is just left at home, expected to be like what, a housewife. The responsibility aspect of her character is like non-existent in that like everyone around her like is like not expecting anything of her.
Right.
You know? So I think once again, that's a third thing that clearly needs fixing in her life and is relatable. Number 4, being invisible to key people or seeking invisibility. I think it's both. I think you can say that Julia's sexual needs are 100% invisible to Larry. And her emotional struggles are invisible. Like they have that dinner party where all their friends are coming over and she's like going through all this shit and no one has a clue. Right? Like she's complete.
Yeah,
who? Go ahead, Bob.
I was going to say, Larry, it's not that Larry actually cares that there is something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to fix it, but he has literally no concept of what it could be. In any capacity. Like, right.
And as a result, she seeks solitude.
Right.
The only person she wants to be visible for is Frank.
Right.
And so I think that fourth thing that needs fixing is very measurable. And then we have the fifth one. Others don't believe in you and you've given up on yourself. I think it's very clear and measurable that she's given up on the possibility of a sexually fulfilling life. Like she seems very lonely, very sexually unfulfilled, and very upset and depressed about it and just yearning, right? Like she's from the second to get in that house, she is fantasizing about having sex with Frank because that was a time where she felt fulfilled, right? So I feel, and desire, that speaks to the whole movie, desire. So I feel like all 5 of these things that need fixing are very measurable, and that makes her a very relatable lead, you know? And so despite the fact that her goal is so unconventional for a horror hero, I think she fits all of the standard approaches that make for a good setup for a character that we're following for the duration of the movie.
Would you guys also agree that like everything you just said, Jimmy, like in a lesser movie, I feel like a lot of that stuff would have been said out loud by a character. Mm-hmm. All of it is execution. Everything you said was execution. It's all on the screen. It's all performed. It is,
but you don't hear them say. You don't
hear them say it. She doesn't say, I'm so sexually unfulfilled.
I'm sexually unfulfilled.
Yeah, like doesn't. Or she have a conversation.
You don't see me.
Right.
That's how I saw the new reboot. That's how they do it.
You don't entrust me with responsibility.
Jamie, I would love it if they just had somebody scream the obvious shit.
It's like Marissa Tomei in my cousin Vinny. Like,
right.
Don't just say my heart's pumping here. Whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, she just screamed.
My relationship with you is strained.
Yeah. I'm not happy.
I'm a flesh and blood woman.
I want a zombie demon to fuck me.
That's how they fixed it in the reboot.
Yeah. She just says it all out.
But yeah, so Jamie, that was really good that you asked that, because I wasn't planning on talking about that, and it really made me think. And then I was like, okay, let's go. Let's dive in. Let's see.
No, it's all
And
tracks. It tracks.
We don't get and I didn't even try. It is because we mix up our topics every time we do this. We're not always doing the same thing, so we're not breaking theme in here. And honestly, I'm not even sure exactly what that is, and I don't want to try to do it on the fly.
Yeah, we can do. I mean, when we get to the monster in the house stuff, like I think the sin taps into that.
The sin taps in.
So, but Jamie, do you want to do the log line? Do you want to play with that?
Let's go to the log line.
Well, yeah. The only thing I was going to say though, with the protagonist aspect, is I'm not sure that that protagonist does an arc. Because it's like the things that need fixing happen. But then she goes off the rails and ends up in tragedy because she doesn't.
Yeah,
arc.
It's a wrong way goal, and she doesn't learn the lesson.
It's a wrong way goal.
Does anyone arc in the movie?
I don't think so, because
right?
I don't.
It's not about that.
It's not about. Yeah, it isn't.
I think because of our protagonist switch, she's not set up to need an arc.
Yeah,
really.
They play with that in the second movie.
Yeah. Yep.
So.
Okay. So yeah, logline discussion. Let's talk log lines. So the big thing to crack with this one. So what I always say about log lines, I'm more interested in the story DNA than the log line. And the story DNA is part of the log line. So let me tell you what the story DNA is there's a hero, they have a goal, there's an obstacle in the way, and if for some reason they don't achieve the goal, some horrible thing will happen. Okay, so Indiana Jones has to get the Lost Ark. He doesn't know where it is. There's Nazis in the way. And if he doesn't get it, the Nazis will get it and take over the world, whatever. Okay, so that's kind of hero goal obstacle stakes. And you can, there's templates out there. I have a template in my book, for example. It's like after a catalyst, a hero tries to achieve a goal and overcome the obstacles, or else stakes, right? So I looked at the IMDb logline. I didn't really try to write my own logline because the IMDb logline had hero goal obstacle stakes, and I agree with them. So here it is. Here's the IMDb logline. By the way, the IMDb loglines, they're written by whoever. They're not written by Clive Barker. Didn't write this.
Yeah.
It's some jabroni wrote this.
I mean, Wikipedia works, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is the IMDb logline. It's actually 2 sentences. Typically, loglines are a single sentence that describe all the story DNA. But honestly, there's no rules. If 2 sentences work for you, do 2 sentences. If you get in 3 or 4, you're probably more like a synopsis and less like a logline.
By the way, I'm going to challenge this logline after you describe it.
Okay. A woman discovers the newly resurrected, partially formed body of her brother-in-law. So first of all, this is the catalyst part. Remember, I said after a woman discovers the resurrection, partially formed body of her brother-in-law. This one part, maybe this is what you're going to challenge, because I don't think.
Yeah, why?
She starts killing for him to revitalize his body so he can escape demonic beings that are pursuing him after he escaped their sadistic underworld.
It's a funny log line because it's like, why is she killing her brother?
It's like
you don't give the important information there.
Yeah,
and it's like
this is a very empty log line.
Totally. Yeah.
She starts killing for him to revitalize his body, so she can be together with him. I think he
should be called a lover, not brother-in-law. Right?
So I like that you found that, because that's like sort of a good place to start from and sort of like ask questions about like when you're thinking about story DNA, right? So this concept is way less, this talking point, and I'm sure you guys are on the same page, for listeners, is way less about the poetics of the log line and how it reads, and more the function of all of the pieces of that.
I find people get into trouble when they start doing the poetry, when it's like,
and that's usually
when they fall into little cliches, like, will they ever find the love of their life, or something.
Yeah. So the first thing is a woman, they just say a woman, and nowhere in this log line does it like approach her from a flawed protagonist.
Right.
And so we want to look at it from that. And I don't know if I would call this flawed, but it's the stasis equals death. Do you want to like explain to stasis equals death, and then I'll pitch that?
Yeah, sure. So the stasis equals death, and it goes back to the things that need fixing that we talked about a moment ago. Usually it means if nothing happens, if they just live out their life and no story happens, they don't find a bloody body in the upstairs or whatever, then that is kind of a death for this person. That person is going to live less of a life. That person is kind of dead in the soul or psychologically in some ways. They need to move forward.
So the story exists to put, that would be Julia. So the story exists. If your story if you're telling an arc plot story, and I would argue that oddly this is an arc plot story. It's not an anti-plot story. Maybe you disagree, but if you're telling an arc plot story, you want the story that's the conflict to push them out of that stasis equals death into a new place. And if they don't, it is a tragedy, right? So I think Julia's stasis equals death obviously is all 5 of those things that need fixing. But when it comes down to just distilling it to one thing, I think she's trapped in a cold, sexless marriage, right? Like a woman trapped in a cold, sexless marriage would be, for me, the first part of the log line. Right. Yeah. That's her stasis equals death from her perspective.
And that works fine. A lot of times people try to pair like an adjective, a descriptive adjective.
A depressed woman or
And usually there's tension in the adjective pairing.
Right.
So maybe wife, and then you put something else like, I mean, the bad example is unsatisfied wife or something, sexually unsatisfied wife or something.
A
love-scorned wife or
some tension between the noun you're choosing, and you don't usually use Julia. You say a woman because nobody cares if it's Julia or Jody.
And again, I'm not talking about the poetry. I was just kind of trying to point to like the purpose of this activity.
The way you did it is perfectly fine in my opinion, because there's no rules, and it might be more descriptive. It's more words, and it might not work for all log lines, but I think that's a better description of it. We get what you're saying better than maybe unsatisfied. Like, what does that mean? She wants to go back to work, or something.
Right.
So,
she's living a sexless existence, and she wants to be sexually fulfilled. That's like her desire.
Yep.
So, and then the catalyst is she's returning to the place where she last had sexual fulfillment. This is the place. The story shows us from the moment she walks in the door, she's fantasizing, flashing back to the last time she was here. And the last time she was here, she was having sex with Frank, and she was super happy about it, and she was fulfilled. And so the tension there, the contrast is we see her in the present, and she's cold, unfulfilled, and like her life is stuck with those 5 things that needs fixing. And so this catalyst brings her to the place where she doesn't know it, but the guy who could answer those for her, who could take her out of the stasis death, is just there back in the room waiting for her. Yeah.
Which, by the way, also removes the coincidence of it all happening there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not coincidental,
it's
right?
Not
that's so weird. Yeah,
Frank went there for a reason. Right.
Yeah. So that doesn't tidily fit in the IMDb logline, but that to me is the catalyst, right?
I mean, so basically the rewrite is a woman caught in a cold, sexless marriage discovers the newly resurrected, partially formed body of her lover.
Yeah, but that's not quantifying the return to the place, like the why here, why now.
Yeah, while returning to the place, she had an affair.
Yeah, like the why here, why now. I understand why it's not on the IMDb logline, but the why here, why now is like crucial to the premise.
Though honestly, like
long though.
Sometimes they're the things that you do sacrifice. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
I don't know if I put them in there.
Because what really pitches the concept is you really have to get to finds the partially formed body of her.
That's the pitch.
So sometimes you do an extra. That's when you pull the extra sentence out. You're this part's really important to sell the concept.
Yeah.
And then you might do the extra sentence. But yeah, I mean, these things can be run on too, and it's all
Yeah,
older.
but even so then let's talk about the goal. So like they say she starts killing to revitalize his body. That is the goal. So that is the measurable goal.
Yeah.
Like that's accurate.
The physical goal.
Yeah.
But like this last part, so he can escape the demonic beings, like we all said, like that's not accurate.
She's not doing somebody that for that reason.
Yeah.
Yes, she's doing
to
it.
be with him again.
Yes. Right. Yes. There's even a line he says, and there are 2 lines. Now, granted, I found the 2 lines in the whole movie where Frank is worried about the Cenobites. And it's at 43 minutes and 48 minutes. So there's only two moments in the whole movie where Frank is actually articulating, oh, you got to help me escape the Cenobites. And then the rest of the movie, it's a non-issue. It's not creating urgency. It's not creating tension from his standpoint. From our standpoint, we're waiting for them, right?
Right.
But like from his standpoint, he's not worried about this. And from her standpoint, her only urgency is like, I want to have sex with you as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. Like that is the tension, that is the urgency, that's what's driving her to do everything. And he has a line, he's like, we can be together the way we were before. We belong to each other now, for better, for worse, like love, only real. And she holds his hand and puts his gross ass fucking finger, runs it across his lips, and she's lusting after him, more motivated than ever. So it's definitely all about, like, in this situation, like I talk about sometimes
as
people,
Twitter put it, the D.
It's about the D. Yes. D, yeah. And it's like when I'm reading scripts, a lot of times people confuse stakes and confuse reward, or they forget reward, or they mislabel stakes as reward. But in this case, I think the stakes and the reward are the same goddamn thing, which is she's going to lose sexual fulfillment or she's going to gain sexual fulfillment.
Right. And
as simple as that.
There's another story that could be about escaping demonic beings. Like that could be stakes, but it's not the stakes for this movie.
It's incredible how little Frank even considers that in the movie. He just doesn't.
He's like, it's only a matter of time, but hey, in the meantime.
He's a man on a mission. He's like, I just got to get my body back. He doesn't give a crap about anything else.
and to apologize for movie blogger 76, who probably created this logline. They were probably, if you looked at this logline the way we just described it, somebody might look at it and say, I thought that was the one with the pinhead guy. You know what I mean? Like, where's the pinhead guy? And what I would suggest, like if this were more a selling logline, first of all, I don't even care. I'm like, most of my logline stuff with writers is before you write the project, or make sure you have
the compass. But a lot
and then
there's like saying that, but I think so.
Then there's the back end version where you have to send query letters to managers and agents and producers, and they're 2 different things, really. So what we described was more the front end version.
Yes.
Maybe in the back end, you could change partially formed. You could add the bit about the box and, the puddles box and the demons
like
took a skin.
Double mumbo jumbo almost, isn't it?
I don't think so.
Log line.
It's teasing enough. It's selling it.
And I think it's all part of why, because you could also ask with this one, like, let's say we cut off the demonic beings. Like, I could see somebody reading this log line and be like, what's partially formed body mean?
Yeah.
I don't know
what the fuck does that mean?
Why is she killed? And then they'd ask you a question like, well, why does she have to kill for a part? I don't understand this log line at all.
So the demonic tag at the end sort of gives context to the rest of it. Yeah.
Right. Now we're doing the first step of the log line, which is the checkbox, which is the hero goal, the story DNA, the part I'm concerned with. The other part has its own math and magic that is case by case. And I think this one's going to be a bit of a doozy to fit it all in, to make a selling log line.
Right.
And maybe you need 3 sentences, who knows?
And we've talked about this a lot. Log lines are really hard to do after the fact.
Yes.
And they're a lot easier to do before the thing is written, so we're totally doing it after the fact.
Yep. So I think this one has very clear, the good news is I think this movie has very clear story DNA. She needs to kill. That's how she's getting him back. She's doing it for love or physical love or whatever you want to say. It's very clear, very obvious. The obstacle is she's not a killer. She has to kill people. That's clear tension. All of those things are the important things with story DNA.
It's a very simple movie in the best way, but it's amazing how you can say that, and it also just doesn't explain the mechanisms by how this stuff happens.
Yeah, man.
All.
Yeah,
Like,
I love that.
At
it's
all. Like,
it's clean and not clean at all.
His brother's blood dripped on the floor and seeped into the house where his heart is beating under the floor because of what happened with Pinhead, and he gets reformed
in the cold
partially.
open. Yeah,
I feel like that's not a movie that would hold up to a cynical review today. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
I agree.
People today want to know every little detail
Nice
of why
and
stuff
neat.
right.
Yeah.
What's funny about it?
The messiness is so great, though.
I
don't need that explained. It just is. Yeah.
Yeah.
This was a very influential story to me, and there are two movies that I think I emulated very early on, like when I started to write, and it was this and Pet Sematary are very similar in some ways. It's like, let's kill to bring back the kid or whatever. Let's bury him to bring him back, and we have to kill people and put him. There's something about the trade-off or the math of bringing somebody back from the dead. In that case, they're burying him back and seeing what comes back. But it was funny. I was going through my garage last year, and I've dug up this old dot matrix printed short story I wrote, right? And it was about this will take you back, pre-internet BBSs, right? And it was about somebody trying to bring somebody back by uploading their soul or something to a BBS. But it was Hellraiser. It was 100% Hellraiser. And I was mixing in this weird kind of premise paint of a BBS. I wanted to do a horror short story about BBSs and people because I used to get on BBS. Do you know what BBSs are?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
That is so hilarious. So BBSs, I'll do it really quick because now I probably have a bunch of people like, what the heck are BBSs? BBSs were pre-internet for real nerds like me, kind of what War Games was when we used to have the modems and they were,
Yeah.
But basically they were run out of people's houses. They were software that was run out of people's houses, and you could go on and message people and play games and do all that kind of stuff. But it was like the early, it wasn't the internet because you could only hit one place, and that's
Al
where your
Gore
messages
hadn't gotten there yet, right?
Yeah, they weren't all connected yet. And then the internet was the next step. Anyway, I had to explain BBSs. It shocks me that you guys are too young to know.
No, it's not that I'm too young. It's that I'm not. That world is completely foreign to me. So that's
it's probably like it's probably right around the time of AOL, like the early AOL, like that kind of started to take away the BBSs, and then the internet came and destroyed it all. So in the 80s, War Games times, and then like 90s up until the internet showed up.
So you kind of made what was it? Hell World, the Matrix internet one sequel that everybody hates of this. Mm-hmm. You wrote that first.
I did.
I made that first before they did it.
I did. And I've been meaning to transcribe it because it's on, like I said, a dot matrix around there. But it was Hellraiser. And I was like, oh my God, I wrote Hellraiser, basically. That's
incredible.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I don't know when I wrote it, but probably 15, 16.
I would read it.
Me too.
Monster we already did the book. We already talked about the book. Do you guys want to talk about Monster in the House now?
Yes, Jamie.
Yeah, so this is another one where I question the monster in the house.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that this is monster in the house so keep in mind that a monster in the house, Blake Snyder genres are storytelling patterns that help you break story. So, there's a bunch of different ones. There's I really feel like I used to watch Ghost Hunters, and they would always describe EVPs in every episode like 10 times. An EVP is this. It's like, yeah, we watched 100 episodes. We don't need to know. I feel like that's what I'm doing. But anyway, and I'm always.
I don't think podcasts are as digestible as watching.
I don't think I'm anywhere near as popular as.
Yeah, you're
Ghost
okay.
Hunters.
No, got to do Monster in the House recap, dude.
Yeah,
and then I'll describe what an EMF detector is. So Monster in the House is these patterns are he has a bunch of examples. Golden Fleece is the one I always start with. Golden Fleece is somebody trying to obtain a trophy, win a prize, slay a dragon. They're on like a quest. It's usually a road trip. There's Buddy Love, which is two people, a relationship story. They come together. They kind of each half a person, but together they're a whole, but there's complications on why they should be together and stuff like that. And there's all these different patterns. He has, and I always forget the number, but I think it's 10. Superhero, dude with a problem, all these others. Monster in the House is one we talk about all the time. And whenever there's a horror movie, we always bring this topic up because it's a really instructive one. And Monster in the House is, there's a house that somebody's trapped in, which this one has. There's a monster in the house and they're trapped with the monster. And there's a sin that brings about the monster. Here's where I don't think this one fits. And this is the reason we had Nope, which was another one that came up like this. And then I think, what did we do last time? I can't even remember. But I was
the Black Phone.
Yeah.
Black Phone, I think, was a Monster in the House. But anyway, the reason I'm not sure is because if we're using Julia as the protagonist, she's not trapped in this house with this monster. It's not a battle for her survival. In some ways, she's the monster.
Well, so Frank needs her. He can't do it, right? So
he can't do it. So I mean, you could look at it as Pinhead's the monster and stuff like that, but I don't think we got to go back to our story DNA, right? And our story DNA tells us this is a woman that has a goal to bring back somebody from the dead. And while that's a dark theme and it is a horror movie, I am not sure that's a Monster in the House. I think that might be more, I don't know.
I'm gonna push back a couple ways.
Okay.
I think maybe there's an abstract monster and it's Desire.
I worry when you say abstract monster.
She's a prisoner to her desire, dude. Like she is fucking like her cerebral desire is insatiable, right? Like she is so driven to get him back because she has so much unfulfilled like sexual need. I don't know. I was just gonna.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
There's no wrong answer to any of this. So that's what's fun to bring it up.
Yeah.
The reason I worry about that is because I think stakes are always the abstract monster in any.
Good point.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep. That is what's.
In some ways, we could go to John Wick and say revenge is the monster.
That's a good point.
So
obsession or
obsession.
Yeah. So good point, Jamie.
But anyway, I like that you bring these up because again, there's no right answers.
But that's also why it works, right? Because she is trapped by something. It just happens not be this exercise.
Because I mean, we have the house, right? The house is a very clear why here.
It literally is all.
That's why. Yeah, I mean, that's why I mentioned it before. And for the catalyst part, like it is the scene of her last sexual fulfillment, right? It's the place she last was happy. And it's where she cheated on her husband, but it made her happy, right? And like, by the way, like this movie does an amazing job. It's nowhere on the talking points, but like for 27 minutes from the moment she walks in, there's this dread and tension that she doesn't know. She's desiring a reunion with this guy, and she doesn't even know that's going to happen, right? So we know, we're like, oh shit, it's coming. So there's all this dread and tension surrounding like, oh, she is going to get this reunion she desires. But then when she finds him, he's a fucking gruesome monster. It's great. I love it. She's like, the good news is Frank's here. The bad news is he's a fucking monster.
Right.
I also find it funny that like when it does switch protagonist, the monster in the house is so simply defined. It's like, Frank is the monster in the literal house.
Then it's
that Kirsty is stuck in. It's like
when it's not protagonist,
it's simple.
Definitely the monster.
In a strange way, this movie could be like slow burn to her, the protagonist.
Yeah,
the back half of the movie.
Yeah,
and I think that's why while we're debating this, the one big thing I always highlight with the Blake Snyder genres is these are less good at analysis tools.
Yes,
tools
exactly.
To bring
They're
stuff
brainstorming, right?
And you could see why labeling this movie up front, like we were just brainstorming, we had this idea, and calling it a monster in the house, even if it wasn't, may be helpful to us. Like, what's the sin that brings it about? Who's the monster? What house are they trapped in? What's special about the house? So that's why there's no right or wrong answers while we're having this, discussion about it. if you were brainstorming this idea and called it a monster in the house, even if you were wrong, it might help you come because you're writing a horror movie.
It might help you get the right answers for all these main things you need to include in the story.
It's almost like
you there.
I almost feel like if you're writing a horror movie, whether or not it is a monster in the house plot wise, you probably should answer these questions. Like,
yep.
What's the house? What's the monster?
Do you want to explain the sin? I have a pitch for the sin. I don't know if you guys have a pitch for the sin, but do you want to explain the concept of the sin, Jamie?
Sure. Though I think the sin is kind of obvious in this one, so I'm curious to hear what you say.
Also, the concept of the sin is pretty obvious, right?
Yeah. Well, then maybe I'll just be repeating what you say.
No, but I'd like to hear
what's a famous sin from a horror movie that isn't this one? Like, to give people an example.
I always say like corporate greed and Alien. Like,
okay, yeah.
It's really the sin ultimately is the corporation is sending them down to investigate this thing they already know is bad, and then the monster comes about. Some sin happens and it's not even necessarily that the heroes or the innocent people commit the sin. And Poltergeist is the one I always use.
Yeah.
The family didn't do anything, right?
The family, well, kind of the dad's a little bit culpable, but not really. He didn't know.
He knew he would have never.
He wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and by the way, if you haven't seen Poltergeist,
we do an
build
episode
the house
on it too. By the way,
they build the house on top of where there used to be a graveyard, and they don't move the bodies.
They didn't respect the dead.
They didn't respect the dead. So, what's the sin that brings about the monster in this movie?
Frank's desire, right?
Yeah, and I would think playing with that puzzle box is kind of like the
I would even say it's more just his desire to find the reaches of human experience.
Yeah,
more than just a simple puzzle box. But
I was going to say what I
ended up anywhere with.
That's the note behind the note is like that's the bigger picture, but the puzzle box is kind of the representation of it that brings about the monster.
Well, because originally I was like, it's not infidelity. It's infidelity is a response to something.
That's pretty good though,
right? Mm-hmm. But I mean that is something she does, but that doesn't speak to the core, which is like what you just said, which I think it's pleasure at the expense of others' pain. Because if you watch the movie, there's all these different explorations of that. Like pleasure is always coming at the expense of another person's pain. And sometimes that person is you too.
I was going to say
that's a good point.
Mm-hmm. The infidelity doesn't work for me as the sin because Frank doesn't give a crap about the infidelity at all.
No.
Like, it doesn't matter to him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's indifferent.
But like she's seeking pleasure at the expense of her husband. Like that's the sin, not the infidelity part of it.
Yeah. And the weird part to me to rectify, and again, I didn't do the theme for this, is Clive Barker doesn't strike me as somebody that would be puritanical and not be sex positive. So finding the ultimate pleasure, I don't think Clive Barker would think that's a sin. You know what I mean? Like, go for it. Find your ultimate pleasure. So what is it about finding the ultimate pleasure in the lament configuration that is unique, that is the sin that brings about the monster? Why is that? Why is he putting a warning sign on that in this movie? Is always the question I ask myself. Like what?
So like the journey to find the ultimate pleasure is okay, but be careful how deep you dig. Like,
yeah, the pain that's going to come with that.
You go to any extreme in the universe, something bad is on the other end, no matter what it is. Yeah. It's just it's a warning of extreme, maybe going too hard, no pun intended. But you know what I mean? Like, I see what you're saying, Jamie. Like, there's no shame in pleasure, but too much of a good, there's always too much of a good thing.
That's why I said at the expense of pain.
Right.
I don't really, and honestly, this is where my contextual side falls apart, but it is the 80s and AIDS is around prevalently in this. And I don't know if that comes into this or something.
I don't
honestly,
either.
I didn't even think of that.
I don't think any of us
moment.
could really speak to it properly, but I'm sure that there might be an answer somewhere if you in Clive Barker interviews
I bet,
and something like that.
I'm sure in his commentary, which I thought I had, but I didn't, he would say it.
It does. Yeah. I can see what you're saying, Jamie, though. It seems like it could have like a influence there.
Yeah. It likely does.
That's also why in this movie, if we're just disregarding the sequels, in this movie, the Cenobites are sort of neutral. in that they're not. He's like I'm kind of transitioning to the killer praise the killer speech, but he does say like we're just these beings of experience, and to demons to some, angels to others. So it doesn't feel like they're even out to be like judgmental.
Right.
They're just like, hey, we're here to do our job, and that is
right. You called, we came.
We're here to make you experience some shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like because talking about the half man, right, and the praise of
it's weird because
it's a very odd.
Because the half man is typically warning about the main monster, and I think we're all in agreement that the Cenobites are really an off-screen
thing.
They're not a threat until the last act.
You could argue that Pinhead gives the praise of killer speech almost. Right?
That's actually interesting. I didn't think about that.
And so just to the half man is another monster in the house thing.
Right.
And it's Quint is the good example of a half man. It's usually somebody it's somebody that's faced the monster and has the scars to prove it. And they have some knowledge about the monster, the overall monster. So that's why I mean
that Frank isn't the half man.
Well, I list Frank as the half man. I think Frank is the half man. I do. I mean, he is half a man in some ways. Again, it's a weird movie. I think he does a praise of the killer speech a little bit in the midpoint.
He does.
There's a and this is something I've noted that a lot of horror movies have what I call the midpoint monologue. It doesn't happen right at the midpoint, but around the midpoint.
Love that, Jamie.
Yeah.
Right.
And the one I always come back to is Final Destination when you see Tony Todd, he talks about it's right around the midpoint.
Right.
This one, it's right around the midpoint that he finally
it's 47 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not quite the midpoint, not quite, but
close enough.
Close enough. And they usually give kind of a bit of an exposition-y dump, or at least this praise of the killer idea that Robert McGee talks about, where you basically are a hype man talking about the monster that will show up in the end and screw everybody up.
I was gonna give like a hot take that Julia is basically because not all the half man are fearing the monster. We've looked at lots of movies where the half man character,
just have to
quote
know
unquote,
the monster. Right?
There's sometimes historians, monster historians, and then there's sometimes monster helpers, like Renfield helps Dracula. And I think that you could argue that Julia is a Renfield to Frank, and like that Julia, even though she's our lead, is also functioning from a storytelling standpoint as the quote unquote half man who has, knowledge of the monster and, is helping the monster. And
the fact that there's two, generally,
it's fucking weird.
There's two monsters kind of, because there's Frank. And then there's the Cenobites.
Yeah.
Right. So,
and then, you could also argue Julia, even though she's our lead.
Right.
She's like a slasher villain.
And the praise the killer for her would be Kirsty talking about her mother.
Yes.
It kind of goes back to what Jamie was saying, like, are these good people? Do we like them? Because it brings the fact
we can relate to them at least.
I know, but I'm just saying, like, the waves of it there.
Yeah.
Like, everybody.
That's why it's unconventional.
Right.
That's why it's so unconventional.
I mean, there's totally a version of this movie that you could have that doesn't have the Cenobites in the end.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they just finish off Frank, she escapes, there's a big battle. That's the end.
There's no doorway to like the hell that opens.
It's all that.
It's basically just a curse.
I think it would function without it.
Yeah. That's what I mean. It feels, I mean, and not knocking this movie in any way, because we love Pinhead and this gave us Pinhead. But that's why it feels it almost feels tacked on in some ways. Like,
it does.
It feels like
I agree.
We need this because it's an 80s horror movie. And now let's bring it in.
But without that, we wouldn't be talking about it right now.
Right. No, not at all.
It gives the movie the flavor and the weirdness and the extreme.
I think nowadays they'd make a movie like this, like without that, and it would be like an A24 movie.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's what I'm saying. Like, I think it's instructive to point to this movie as being a classic and how it does all those unconventional things that we're talking about, and it works. right? So like to not be afraid to do that, because like you said, Jamie, it could be an A24 style movie and people fucking love it.
The one thing it does that this unconventional nature does, it makes the movie very fast paced because it keeps changing. You know what I mean? It's like we're killing people, we just kill one after another. Oh, the daughter finds out. Oh, now the daughter's involved. Now she's got the box. Oh, now Pinhead shows up. You know, it makes it gives you a lot of stuff to do. Whereas if you didn't have that, you'd have to stretch what you had over a longer period of time and probably make it more dramatic and probably more of a drama in some ways.
It's also you could also argue the Cenobites are like world building, right?
Absolutely.
Like, that's why the movie feels bigger than just the story of just the story of what's happening in this house, marriage wise, and like the serial killing and everything. And
especially when you see like the works Clive Barker went off to, like especially in his novels,
right?
Like they become much bigger and much thicker. You know, his 150 pages. You see what he really likes. He likes the world building and the mythology and all that stuff. And you could tell he's kind of restraining himself almost here into a classic kind of horror movie in some ways.
We didn't talk about POV yet, right?
No, and
POV to create tension.
To Jamie's point that you just said of how it jumps around and it's constantly changing and keeping it fresh, and that speaks to like this time around I noticed something that it does that creates a lot of tension, which is and we've seen this a lot in horror movies that we've been looking for techniques to learn from, and it's constantly swapping between giving us superior position. Like we're ahead of Julia just ever so slightly. We're ahead of Larry. We're ahead of Kirsty ever so slightly, but we're never ahead when it comes to the box and when it comes to the Cenobites. And it does this interesting thing where every time they come up, which is about like, we go like 45 minutes without them coming up, it sort of pulls the rug out from under us, and we're no longer in superior position, and we are taking in the knowledge that either Julia's learning or Kirsty is learning, especially when she's in the hospital. Like, we don't know what she's up for, right? Like, what is about to happen, right? And that creates this extra sense of all those types of tension, Jamie, that you talk about. All of a sudden, there's such a variety of types of tension when we don't know what the fuck is happening and we're not in superior position. So I think it's a great instructive example of how you can go like 20 minutes where we're completely ahead of the characters, and then you can change it where we know only what they know, and then you can pop it back and we're ahead of the characters, and it works to really keep you off balance as an audience,
Yeah, I find this movie very Hitchcockian in some ways. Like it almost feels like it could be an Alfred Hitchcock movie, but then you throw in this weird Cenobite thing. Because it almost has like a strangers on a train vibe where, she has to kill for her lover, and there's an affair going on, and it's kind of melodramatic, but then there's murder involved. And it's really a suspense thing, right? It's not as much horror as she's got to lure somebody back to the lair and murder them, and she's not a murderer.
Right.
And that's so we're kind of there in this weird suspense where we're kind of rooting for her in some ways, but then we're not. We're also worried because we know a murder is about to go down.
Yeah.
It's this weird kind of Alfred Hitchcock vibe, I think it has going for it at times.
Also, like I was going to say, Jimmy, the hospital scene for me is always a weird point of tension. Because I always, for some reason,
it's a weird scene.
It's a weird scene, and whenever I watch it, I'm always like, "Oh, right!" Like she makes a deal. These things show up completely mind blowing, right? Like her mind must be blown, and then she like literally makes like a deal with them right off the bat. And I'm like, I already don't know what's happening with these things, and she makes a deal, and they agree to it. Like I'm like, oh, you could just do that. They don't have to kill you if you open the puzzle box. Like the rules that kind of are established from the beginning is if you open the puzzle box, you get all tortured up and experienced up, right? But apparently they can just kind of do whatever they want.
There's another subversion there where it's like, nope.
Because the tension is like she's going to get
torn apart.
The whole works, right? And then it's just like, oh no, you can.
We came.
They have their own their own free will sometimes to do what they feel.
Yeah.
That's right. So I was just like that scene to me. I'm always like ready to. I'm always kind of like tense, and then like, oh, you can just talk to him, like, and they'll listen. If you have good shit. Yeah. Okay.
That whole sequence always gets me because there's the weird nun thing where the nuns are like looking at her, and it's kind of funny almost. It feels like a comedy moment. And then that doctor is so weird. He's like, you'll have to talk.
Right.
I'm like, why does she have to talk to the cops?
It made me feel like we were in an Elm Street situation.
It did.
Hallucinating, and
it felt like Pinhead was going to pop out of her stomach or something, and be like, I'm here. Yeah.
Also, real quick, when we're talking about tension, and I think this leads into the next topic, that we don't talk about the derelict guy.
Oh yeah.
Really, which is even if you want to talk about the Cenobites feeling tacked on, I always feel like the he does feel even more so, right? Like, but there's a tension with her.
He creates tension, like
because it just feels like something's going on that knows about her.
Right.
Yeah. And it's almost unexplainable, right? Like, I don't even know where that. I like it. I don't know where that came. I don't know exactly how that puzzle piece fits. Sometimes,
Jamie, do you want to recap your types of tension, and then I'll bounce off of that with what I wanted to talk about?
Sure. So in storytelling and when you write, tension is a really important thing. A lot of people.
Will Jamie answer the phone? The tension.
Let's see if it's an important person, Colin. So tension is a lot of people would say you need conflict, and what that really means is you need tension. Conflict is a source of tension. Hopefully that'll stop in a second. So conflict is your ultimate source of tension. It's, will the hero succeed or will they fail? Will the obstacle stop them? Will the stakes hit? That's the ultimate tension. It's a question that is implanted in the reader or the viewer's mind, and it's kind of a need. They need that answer. They're worried about the right answer. But then sometimes you need other forms of tension, and there's all kinds of things. There's like mystery, there's curiosity, there's romance, there's suspense, like we have in here. There's a suspenseful form of tension. So when you're thinking about conflict and you need conflict, what you really need is tension. So if you're devoid of, if you look at a scene that feels flat, nothing's happening, if you can inject it with some form of tension, whether it's suspense, whether it's conflict, that's the way to punch up that scene.
Yeah, this list, ever since you gave it to us, because you only introduced this to us about not too many episodes ago. So this is sort of a new talking point in our show. And it's that I have found that this has been very helpful when I'm helping my clients to kind of give them other brainstorming techniques to make a scene more layered and complex, because a lot of times a scene will just have one thing happening, like one type of tension. And we just did the Everything Everywhere All at Once episode, and appropriately so in that opening scene, we found all 7 different types of tension here, all layered and stacked on top of each other, that made that scene feel so stressful. That opening scene, it's why you feel so many things and why you're captivated and want to find out what happens next. But what I was noticing while watching this movie is there was another type, and I know you haven't said that these are the only types of tension, but they're very good, like top 7, right? I felt like we could talk about one to add to the list, which, you have something called romantic relationship tension, but I feel like that doesn't really encapsulate sexual tension, which is another thing. And in this movie, there's not just sexual tension when Julie is on screen with Monster Frank or with the flashbacks of Frank, but there's non-consensual, like, sexual aggression where there's just like one scene after another, like the dinner scene where there's like 5 men at the table and then Kirsty and Julia, and all the men are lusting after both of them, and they don't want these men. And, it's unwanted attention. It's unwanted, like, sexual aggression, basically. And this movie plays with that type of tension over and over, right? And it even swaps it. Like, Julia goes to the bar and she's doing the same thing. The tension we feel is that she's using sex as a weapon.
Right.
And we know that these men don't want the type of
also the movers.
the movers, it's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
And to your point that you were talking about the demon guy who's following Kirsty around. That's that tension we feel, right? Like we kind of feel like he's gonna like attack her, and there's like this non-consensual sexual tension. So it was just interesting. Like those are types of tension that I hadn't thought about that this movie is just laden with and playing with. There's like a whiteboard for it, like you can imagine that there was just an idea board of all the ways he could play with that, like it's just, so I think it's really instructive.
Every stare in this movie means something.
Yeah. And it's very much through the female gaze, through the woman's gaze, which again is not something we can speak to, but you can feel it, right? You feel like she's feeling attacked. They're feeling attacked when they're getting this unwanted attention. And the movie plays with that to like extremes, right? Like it plays with like desires and temptations and pushes that to the extremes. It plays with sexual tension and non-consensual sexual aggression pushed to extremes, and dominance and submission pushed to extremes. So it just sort of takes that and like really twists it around and does lots of a variety of things, but you're feeling it.
And the tension she has with, it's like, it's also a very like pointed tension, as in, like you said, with Frank, it's one certain type of tension because that's the guy that she desires.
He wants him.
But with all the other men in the movie,
it's the opposite.
It's the exact opposite because
and both like sometimes it swaps from.
It's oddly empowering, right? Like
when she's giving them a middle finger, basically, because
she gets to have the tension with who she wants to, and not with the people who are objectifying her and treating her like that with that aggression, right?
Yeah,
it's interesting. Yeah,
it's different. Not something we talk about, not something that really comes up very often. And I think that sort of speaks to why this movie stands out, because it plays with that so much in a way we don't really get a lot. So, yeah. Add it to your tension list if it's appropriate, to your story. Yeah.
Non-consensual sexual tension.
Yeah, man, it's scary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Premise delivery.
Okay.
Talk about that.
Yeah. I'm going to just give two examples real quick. So, premise delivery is sort of the most common talked about thing on this show. We're 85 episodes in, and that's like, because I think you guys would agree with me. It's sort of
a bingo card one.
Yes, the bingo covers the whole goddamn bingo card.
Right. Yeah.
But it's like one of the main jobs of the screenwriter, and I feel like it's the one thing that like the screenwriting education doesn't really talk about. And it's in 6 years of reading amateur scripts for a living, that's what I do all day. About 4 hours, I spend about 4 hours 5 days a week reading scripts from people who are either just starting out or like a couple years in, right? So I mainly deal with people who are new to the craft. And if you had told me that this would be what I found is the thing that's missing from a good script to a great script, I wouldn't have agreed with you when I first started. But after 6 years in, it's not structure, it's not theme, it's not character, it's the thing that separates the good script from the great script, in my experience, is delivering on the promise of the premise. So what does that mean? Basically, in my opinion, it's at its core, it's giving the audience like people, places, things, scenarios, and dialogue they could only get when they're popping on your movie, when they're diving into your story world. And it's the reason why Harry Potter just keeps growing and growing. It's the reason why Star Wars just keeps growing and growing. It's the reason why these franchises like Hellraiser have 9, 10 sequels and stand the test of time and live on for decades, because the first one creates a world and an experience that is so unique and specific that like we could only get it right in this movie. And so I wanted to kind of
more of it.
You want more of it.
Right.
So you just crave, you keep coming back because you can't get it in your world. Right, you can only get it. You
can't get it in other movies, stories. Yeah, you can only get it. So I wanted to kind of show how this movie does that. It's basically you just like I call it the ordinary to extraordinary exercise, and that is like in Ghostbusters Afterlife,
they do target practice. So they take this ordinary scenario that's really familiar to us in cinema. It's like a cliche, right? It's a trope. Target practice in a movie, and they make it specific to Ghostbusters, and they're practicing learning how to use the proton pack, and they just literally obliterate not just the bottles, but the fence itself, which just explodes. And that's giving us target practice that is so unique to the experience of this world that we can only get it while we're watching a Ghostbusters Afterlife. So in that regard, the first example that I think is really instructive is carrying a mattress up the steps. So, the mattress obviously has like dual meaning because this is a movie about sexual desire. So picking that object, that thing, is very specific. Like, we're thinking about sex when we're thinking about a bed, like things like that. So it could have been just a very boring scene where, two characters carry a mattress up the steps and just have like a hard time. Everybody can relate to that. What they did was they made it specific to everything that this movie is about. There's the movers are lusting after Julia, and she is like, she's like wants nothing to do with them. The husband is completely cold to it all. Like, he doesn't care that the movers are lusting after his wife, and he's a bit dismissive. He's like the most dismissive to Julia.
He even gives them beer.
He gives them beer to get them more drunk. Here, lust more after my wife some more.
Right.
And then it's juxtaposed with Julia fantasizing about the last time she had sex with Frank, and she's in the room where she did it. And then he comes up the steps, and his hand gets torn on a nail in the door frame, and then the blood seeps into the floorboards and gives birth to Frank, dead Frank. And so this is taking a very ordinary situation that we're familiar with, and if you pop that into any other script, it doesn't work. And that's the goal. I'm constantly reading scripts where I read this scene, and I literally could take that scene, even though the characters are specific to the script I'm reading, I could pop that scene in any other script and it would work. And that shouldn't be the case. You should only be writing things that are so unique and play with your premise in so specific ways that it only works in your story. So that mattress thing, I think, is a great example of how to do that. So that becomes an extraordinary carrying the mattress up the step scene that we've never seen before. So the second example is husband and wife having sex. Wow. Like, how many times have we seen sex scene in a movie between a husband and a wife? And they could have done anything, but what they did was she's literally seducing him into the bed to save his life from this ghoul.
From the ghoul, right.
From the ghoul that is her brother. And then while they're having sex, it's that one scene, two perspectives thing where she's like, no, stop, I can't bear it. While he's trying to come out of his life, and Frank is behind them, approaching, ready to like basically eat his brother. So like, we're getting a very ordinary scenario, a very mundane thing in cinema, which is the husband and wife sex scene, and we're seeing it in a way that is so unique and specific to this movie, to this premise, that it would never work in any other movie. And that's the goal. That's how you should be approaching when you're coming up with ideas, when you're coming up with characters, when you're coming up with scenarios, when you're coming up with places, when you're coming up with dialogue, which we're going to get to later. It should express the movie it should be a snapshot of the premise. And this movie has endless ways that do it, but these two examples I think are really easy to learn from. And it's a really easy way to like follow, right? Like, you take something ordinary, put premise paint on it, you get something special.
You could almost argue the sex scene that you're talking about is like the thing you came up with first to write.
Right. It's like the whole thing.
Okay, I want to write a movie that makes sense and is awesome, but it has to have this scene where a man is having sex with his wife and a ghoul comes out of the closet and kills a rat. And I'm going to make that
over
make
top
sense.
of them. And she's saying, I can't bear it. But what she's really saying is,
how do you
can't bear this guy killing? Oh my God. It's so good. You
have to make a movie around that.
There's so much craft there. That's writing. That's in the construction, 100%. So anyway, There's my spiel on that. Very passionate about this subject.
No, it's one of the premier topics of this show. I feel
I feel like I've always felt like when I get a script that is really good at premise delivery, like I think very highly of the writer. Like, oh, this is somebody that has ideas. I need this person on my team. You know what I mean? Because if they really know how to do that, then they can come on your script. Like if I was a producer, for example, and make it better. They can just be like, I got all these ideas. You can do this and you can do that. You can, there's all kinds of things you can apply. So
yeah, applying that, that premise paint idea.
Yeah, whenever I see somebody come with the premise delivery, I'm always like, oh, this is somebody that, they in some ways I'd say it feels like something that's instinctual and they're just like the ones with the 100-mile-an-hour fastball or something. But on the flip side, I know for a fact it's something you can learn and you can put yourself into. But there is something, just like people who are good with character, I think there's something instinctual about that, but there's also things you can learn as well.
Something intuitive. Yeah. I hear you.
Yep.
But this for me was sort of like, even in my own work, like when I watched the first movie I've made, for context, I have 7 feature films that I've co-written and co-produced. And the difference between the quality of the storytelling in the first movie to the third movie is the first 2 movies, I didn't understand why something was working so well. You know what I mean? I was like, this is cool. But I didn't understand that by the third movie, I was using premise paint. Like intentionally, and I wasn't doing that in the first 2 movies, and it took 3 movies of figuring out why is something resonating with audiences and why is this not working. And like the common denominator was premise delivery, like something that was just okay was because it really could happen in any other movie. And then something that was really like the best stuff, like the gold that rose to the top in the movie, was because it was like expressing the movie. It was like a snapshot of the whole thing. Perfect. If you just showed you that one moment, you could understand what the movie was about.
So like if you can look at your movie or script and say, this can only happen here.
Yeah. Then that's when you know you're onto something.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And on top of that, we talked about premise pretzels,
right?
Which is really, first you have to come up with that thing that only works in this movie, that's unique to this movie, unique to this concept. And then a premise pretzel is taking that same thing and like reusing it, to finding another way, sometimes to bend it backwards, to look at it in reverse, to do it's like taking the thing happens one way. What would be the opposite of that? Or what would be if the good guy used it on the bad guy? What would if the bad guy used it on the good guy? Or what if, or something like that? But to find other ways to use it or use it in a different way.
The scene that Jimmy was talking about. Then eventually later in the movie, she has sex with Frank while he's wearing the husband's skin.
Yep.
Which is kind of the inverse of what they were threatening before, right?
So like they have, to your point, Bob, exactly. There's the same idea used 3 different ways in Julia seducing men back to Frank so that she could hit him with the hammer and feed them to Frank. And then Larry is approaching the same room and she instead seduces him away from the room so that he doesn't kill him and he doesn't eat him. So she's using that same tactic that is really specific to this movie. And then the final one is Kirsty lures Frank back to the room where the Cenobites get him and absorb him. So we have the same idea, the luring to the room, luring away from the room, twisted and turned and used in different ways. And we can see how the situation is changing along with those ideas being twisted and turned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whenever I write like a really cool premise thing, it always nags me until I can find the payoff. Like I feel like that's the setup and there's another payoff to it or something in the back end. There's some echo of it. It always nags me if I only have it used one time and I haven't figured out like the reverse of it.
Right. You got to like make it do 3 or 4 things, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Another one is, and it's sort of, I'm not going to get into the not so secret weapon, but it's the puzzle box, right? So the puzzle box is used in the cold open and brings the Cenobites, and then Kirsty opens the puzzle box and accidentally unleashes the Cenobites again. But then she reverses it. The not so secret weapon is she puts it back to a square, and then all the Cenobites are sucked to suck all the Cenobites out of our realm. So that's another premise pretzel right there. It's taking the same idea and playing with it in different ways to get multiple moments in the movie. And again, when you see those twists, that's also goes hand in hand organically with the situation in the movie changing, right? Like how things are escalating. So yeah, it's another good technique that this movie has plenty of examples with. I was even going to talk about, there's like a whiteboard of, it's not really a premise pretzel, but there's a whiteboard of penetration as a weapon. Like, did you guys notice that? Holy shit.
Sure. Yeah.
They did a fucking, like, Clive was over there, like, how many ways can I make penetration a weapon? Then we got the door frame nail in Larry's hand. It's Clive Barker.
Right, yeah.
The Cenobites hooks into their victims. The giant pizza monster, pizza, penis. This isn't Spaceballs. But speaking of balls, the giant penis monster with a stinger that's trying to penetrate Kirsty. The chomper Cenobite puts his fingers in Kirsty's mouth to silence her. Julia hits men over the head with a hammer. Frank penetrates men with his fingers to like absorb them. And then in the end, like he stabs her.
Yeah,
instead of having sex with her and giving her fulfillment, he stabs her and takes her life force. So I mean, it's all part of that idea.
You can even argue Kirsty's like penetrating the other side briefly.
Yep.
And everything too.
That's true too. And she slashes the skin off of Frank's face. Oh man. So that's another one. Man, there's just there's craft. It's craft. I love it.
Yeah. Last but not least, dialogue repetition. I believe this is a Jimmy.
This is
Jimmy?
So to this point, and Jamie, you can interrupt me if you want to talk too, but that premise delivery also extends to dialogue, right? Coming up with lines that are so unique and specific to the whole concept that like they only become special in your movie. So the phrase "come to daddy" has like sexual dominance connotations to it, right? And this movie plays with that. It takes that ordinary phrase, adds premise paint onto it, and suddenly "come to daddy" becomes this really memorable repeated line that expresses the changing nature of the horror in the movie. So I'll show you, I'll give you the 3 examples where it shows up. So in the flashbacks, Frank, before he died, when he was all sexy, he uses that phrase "come to daddy" to seduce Julia, and she loves it. And it's sort of like how everything starts between them. The second time we hear it is after Frank absorbs Julia's first kill. He's this gory fucking monster, and she comes in, and he's, for the first time, he has like an actual torso, and he looks like humanoid, and he's like, "come to daddy." And she's scared, but then when she gets there, she allows him to touch him, and she likes it, right? She still
it's like the midway point. She remembers the sexuality of it versus the...
So that "come to daddy" suddenly holds... We could only hear that "come to daddy" in this way in this movie. And then the third reversal is when she's wearing Frank is wearing Larry's skin. So he looks like Kirsty's daddy. And he's fucking scary as shit. And she knows it's Frank at this point, not Larry. And he says, "come to daddy." And so, but there's a sexual dominance thing there, because he's clearly, as every time he's interacted with her, Uncle Frank is lusting inappropriately after his niece here. So it's another form of premise delivery that also they do a great job of, like, dialogue, repetition, reversal, and each time it's used, it's showing how the movie is changing, how the horror is escalating, and how the relationships are changing. So it's another great craft example that you can learn from. What ordinary phrase can you take that you can use your premise to make it a phrase that every single time it's heard, you capture that mental real estate of the audience, and they think of your movie and no one else, right? Yeah. So,
and also, like, who's hearing it and who's saying it is taken a different way every time.
Every single time. Yeah.
Like Frank even kind of means it differently every time.
Every single time.
You know
right?
what I mean?
Ooh, it's so creepy.
Right.
Next to Jesus Wept, it's the line I remember the most in this movie is "Come to Daddy." Not "We'll tear your soul apart." We have such so to show. For me, the creepiest line in this movie after Jesus Wept is this. Because
I think they should put it on the poster with
"Come to Daddy."
Come to Daddy.
That'd be pretty good. I think, and that brings us. That's everything, right, guys? I think.
Yeah, I think that's everything
for Hellraiser. And if anyone listening, I think we've already announced this on Twitter, but our next episode is going to be Hellraiser 2022. Mm-hmm. We did this with Candyman. If you like this sort of double feature type of thing, we did it with Candyman. We sort of did it with Speed.
Did it with Ghostbusters.
We did it with Ghostbusters.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we're doing this with Hellraiser.
Yeah, I like it.
Whatever the new one turns out to be, like I'm still kind of. You guys say it's like kind of a sequel, a legacy sequel or something?
Yes. It's like it's like the Candyman 2020 or whatever.
Yeah. Well, it comes out tomorrow. We're doing this on Thursday and it comes out on Friday. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Jamie, do you have I'm sort of cutting out off Bob's. Do we have anything to pitch?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any movies on Huluween?
I do have, I think VHS 2 is on Hulu.
Okay.
But
no, it is. I just posted that the other day.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's why
I made a post about it and I tagged Jamie.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh my God, a movie that I worked on is next to Storm of the Century. I was like, oh my God.
The Night Watchman is on Amazon Prime. Subscription Amazon Prime. So you can watch that. I'm sorry. I'm getting my movies
Comedy
confused.
of
Comedy of horrors.
Horrors, sorry.
Yeah. This is a Halloween episode, so let's talk about our horror movies that are out there.
I'm pretty sure Night Watchman is either on Halloween or Amazon Prime or both. I can't remember which. But Comedy of Horrors for the first time is on Amazon Prime subscription. So you can check that out. I directed one of those. Yep.
I don't think it's on. I don't think Night Watchman is on Hulu. I think it must be Prime.
It used to be. I don't know if it still is.
I was looking through it pretty extensively and I didn't see it. So
I just think it's cool that the next movie we're going to do is premiering on Hulu. And on our show, the two of you worked on VHS 2, which is also on Hulu.
And it's like the cool thing is like VHS 2 is in like 5 of those menus. I was looking through it and I was like,
awesome.
Man, this is all over Hulu right now.
Writers Blockbusters representing.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah. So
it's cool. No, I'm excited for you guys. I'm excited for some people to discover it, and it's cool.
Yeah, I mean, watch VHS 2.
There you go. Watch it.
You can see the great Jamie Nash do his thing.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, that was one of the first times I think we really spent time together, isn't it, Jamie? Was on VHS 2. I can't remember.
I guess so. I mean, I sort of knew you before that, but I can't think.
Yeah, we did.
Outside of a movie theater, I ever saw you out.
Right, outside. Yeah, you exist outside of a theater.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then, is anything? Did you have any of your movies that are?
By the time this comes out, WNUF will be off of Shudder.
Okay.
So it's not streaming anywhere, and not my movies. They're micro budget horror movies, so they're not streaming. People can't find them. Yeah, no. Like none of our movies are streaming anywhere.
Get them shits on Tubi.
Nah, man. The nature of the beast of even Tubi has
distributors
restrictions that we with our micro budget production, we don't necessarily have all the things that are needed.
Yeah,
and so that is the nature
that's
of
weird because,
the streaming beast.
My movie that's on Tubi is not anywhere. It's a Zoom movie.
Tubi's a whole other thing.
Tubi's a whole other deal, right?
Lovely Molly fell out of whoever had the deal with the distribution there. I think it's back to the producers, so you can't find that one anywhere either. That's now,
a shame.
Yeah,
that is a shame. But I just wanted to highlight that two of the hosts on the show, since it's Halloween time, and especially since the movie that we're doing next is on Hulu, have a movie on Hulu, and you should check it out. So
I think you could still watch.
I think that's cool.
You could watch Santa Hunters this Halloween on Hulu as well.
Amazing.
Or what's the other one? Is there a second Santa one?
Tiny Christmas.
Tiny Christmas.
I think that's on Hulu. I think it is.
Or I want to watch.
God,
Teenage
Jamie, you have
Dragon
3
Slayer.
movies on Hulu. God damn, dude, that's awesome. I'm fanboying over here.
For a while, everything I had was pretty much on Tubi because they had Exists and Lovely Molly and VHS2 and like all kinds of stuff. But I think they're all gone now. They don't last long on Tubi.
Yeah, but
I want to make movies just to be on Tubi. I just like Tubi that much.
I rewatched this on Tubi. I think it was on Amazon Prime too, but on my iPad, I didn't have it.
I watched this on physical media.
Okay.
Because I'm cool.
Yeah, this is on Prime. I watched it on Prime because I still have Prime. But yeah, it is on Tubi. You're right.
I had Prime, but I watched it like last night before, and I didn't have it on my iPad. I didn't have my Prime app on my iPad, so I just went to Tubi. I was like, I'll just watch it.
I love that we're just telling listeners about our viewing habits. And
they could have stopped listening when we got to the end of the thing. I was going to say, I'm kind of
but then they won't hear this week's password, the code word.
Oh gosh, yeah. What is it?
This week is lament configuration.
Hashtag lament configuration.
So if you tag all 3 of us and then hashtag lament configuration, we'll probably do.
You make it to the end of this.
The end of this.
We're just gonna like it. Really
I'll send you a Hellraiser GIF or GIF, whatever it's called.
I'll do it too.
The end of this kind of is the lament configuration.
Yes.
That's the one. Have you made it this far?
Closing the box and pulling the 3 of us back into it.
This is as extreme of an experience in pleasure and pain as this show gets.
Yes, that's right.
Our listening to us is an indivisible experience of pleasure and pain.
And you will get an animated GIF if you open the puzzle box on Twitter.
That's right.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Incredible. Yes. I think that's everything, right?
There's
no more plugs.
The 3 of us will show up in your house and tear your soul apart.
We'll tear your soul apart.
You'll zap us with a Rubik's Cube.
Jamie's totally Pinhead. I'll be Butterball. Fine. Yes, I've accepted it.
Chatterbox is perfect for me.
Right. And we'll have to get someone else for the lady Cenobite. She says she's credited, right? Okay, that's everything.
All right, thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
You have just listened to Writer's Blockbusters, a screenwriting podcast featuring 2 professionals and another guy. Available only on Thundergrunt.